This is Mae Brussell. The title of my program is World Watchers. Before I begin the program, I want to say the views expressed here are those of myself and do not necessarily reflect the views of Kazoo staff or board of directors. We want to thank Coast Components at 684-1185, Monterey Bay Area's distributor of electronic components. Thank you for the underwriting grant that helps bring you the following hour of World Watchers. The following hour of World Watchers is also made possible in part by Lowdown, a leading manufacturer of microcomputer peripherals located in Scotts Valley. For more information, call 438-7400. This is broadcast number 834, November the 30th, 1987. This week and next week, December the 6th, I will do what they refer to in some of the investigations as hard hitting. I'll be talking some more about the dirty stuff, the Waffen-SS, the child abuse, the children sacrifice, the adult sacrifices, the rituals of the Satanic cult that go right up through the Pentagon, the Defense Department, and the Justice Department, and linking to very, very high up in the military. And then because it is so revolting, I will go on the easy stuff, the stuff prior to the Satan Heinrich Himmler Castle rituals done with people in the Pentagon, such as Michael Aquino. So December 13th, 21st, and 28th, we'll have what I call the normal news. That may be hard for people anyway, but I call it the regular news. And I will not put you through this through Christmas. We'll cut back a little because it's pretty heavy stuff. Just a couple of items before I get to Michael Aquino and continue with that. For those who haven't listened steadily, last week I did a program on Judge Ginsburg, Douglas Ginsburg, and my belief that he was an agent provocateur that worked with the intelligence community. And 2 weeks, a week before that, and then the third week, 3 weeks ago, and 2 weeks ago, I talked about the child abuse, the Church of Satan, Michael Aquino, and the Pentagon, and Heinrich Himmler's castle, and I'm going back into that again this evening with you and continue with an update of that news and do this for the next couple of weeks. Before I get to that, I just want to mention there was an article in the newspaper suggesting that Pope John Paul II may intervene to win the release of prisoner Sirhan. According to an East Jerusalem newspaper, they said that senior Vatican officials are seriously considering a request from Arab Americans that the Pope press United States authorities to release the man who murdered Robert Kennedy in 1968 in the Ambassador Hotel. While I don't believe that Sirhan murdered Robert Kennedy, that there was a second gun there, it is a symbol of wiping out our electoral process by the bullet. When Robert Kennedy won the Democratic primary that evening, he was killed. Sirhan might have been the patsy, but he's the symbol. And the Pope is interfering, of course, in the American political system and the electoral policies because he has not recognized Israel as a country, and he wants to help the Arab Americans to release Sirhan, who wiped out our choices of an election in 1968 that made the way clear for Richard Nixon and then Ronald Reagan. A very funny article and pathetic, many of you saw in the newspapers, titled Mrs. Meese Tried to Help a Tax Cheat. She sends a letter to the judge and praises the particular defendant that she wanted out, who was a friend of her children's. This is Edwin Meese, who went and fought the law and order tooth and nail as a cover for being hard on criminals when he wanted to be in political office. And now as Attorney General, it doesn't matter if you cheat the government out of taxes, which we badly need. Another article out of the Washington Post, November the 8th, 1987. Judge Bork's critic had his phone tapped at Harvard. And the article says an unauthorized wiretap was found in the office telephone of Harvard professor, Professor Lawrence Tribe, who opposed the Bork nomination. It's outrageous, he said. Whoever did this obviously believes the end justifies the means. The telephone company checked out the phone. Daniel Steiner, the Harvard vice president and general counsel, told the Boston Globe that the telephone company officials, the university telecommunications department, and an outside consultant agreed that the tap would only have been placed to monitor his tribe's telephone calls. It had been placed there from 2 to 8 months. He was a consultant to Edward Kennedy and Joseph Biden in their efforts to defeat Bork's nomination. He testified for 3 hours during the hearings. He also was a counsel to Pennzoil in their $10.3 billion suit against Texaco, but that was handled a little while back. These are current wiretaps and probably had a lot to do with the selection or trying to push through both Judge Bork and later then Ginsburg, who was at Harvard also. So the taps on the telephone were put at Harvard on the one of the big heads of the law department, Professor Tribe, to see what plans he was cooking up to defeat these former students from Harvard who wanted to become justices on the Supreme Court. Another item, Alexander Haig said he would use nuclear arms if he had to. That was in the San Francisco Chronicle, November 16th. Of course, Haig is a protege of Fritz Kramer, Gustav Anton Kramer, the mentor of Kissinger and Haig. And of course, he would be glad to use the nuclear arms. Haig was one of the selected few who jumped over 243 officers to become the general that he is, under the guidance of Fritz Kramer, the former plans officer of the Pentagon. Now, there are a lot of good books out. I'm just going to name the titles real quickly of some of the books because they're so rare that it won't be hard to get, but if you're giving Christmas gifts, you might think of these. Several weeks ago, I gave a suggestion of magazine subscriptions, and also if you get gift money, things to give yourself that other people wouldn't think of, put it into books and subscriptions. I'll make the same offer that I did for the magazines. I suggested sending a self-addressed stamped envelope, and I would give you the name and address and cost of about 60 publications, or 66 publications. And I have a sheet here. If you send a letter to me, Mae Brussell, P.O. Box 22311, Carmel 93922, or my home address is in the book. I'll give you the publisher, the cost, and the information on these particular books. One I've talked about before, Jonathan Whitney's Crimes of Patriots, The Tale of Dope, Dirty Money, and the CIA, which is about the Nugan Bank that I've done so many years of broadcasting with you. The other is a new book by Alex Coburn called Corruption of Empire. He's a great journalist, and he has what he calls 500 pages of radical journalism. It's his daughter-in-law who came out with a new book on the Iran-Contra affair, Out of Control. That's Leslie Coburn that has that book out. Another book is Armed and Dangerous, The Rise of the Survivalist Right, about Reverend Richard Butler and the Aryan Nations. Then Reagan's Reign of Terror, There He Goes Again. And this is a nostalgia collection, edition 695, on Ronald Reagan and his administration. Then the great cartoonist Tom Towles, some of you take a paper that has his cartoon, some don't. He has a book called Mr. Gazoo, A Cartoon History of the Reagan Era, and this would just be fabulous. And then there is a wonderful thing, which I'm sending for this week, called Ronald Reagan Countdown Calendar, January 1988 to January 89. And it comes from La Jolla, it's $9.95. And they advertise, celebrate the final 366 days of the 365 actually, of the 8-year reign of terror, the reign of image over substance, fantasy over fact, reaction over reason, greed over grace, and the simultaneous dismantling of the American traditions of honesty, fairness, justice, and peace. I have to get my Reagan countdown calendar. I just can't believe that this year is coming. This next year will finalize his administration. There's another book called Crisis in Central America, Regional Dynamics and U.S. Policy in the 80s, which is Ronald Reagan. Then another, The Dangerous Doctrine, National Security and U.S. Foreign Policy by Saul Landau, who is an excellent researcher. Then there's The Big Boys' Power, Position in American Business, Ralph Nader and William Taylor. And he does a lot of explosive work in the Reagan administration. Another book, and this looks good, another book, Packaging the Contras, A Case of Disinformation by Edward Chamorro. A former Contra leader exposes the deep involvement of the CIA that created and managed the Contra leadership, the manipulation of the U.S. media and Congress and public opinion. Then another cartoonist has a collection of the Reagan era, Gary Trudeau. It's called Doonesbury, Catch Up on Your History, cartoons of Star Wars, Nicaragua, Iran scam, Ronald Reagan's brain, and so forth. And Out of Control, the history of the Reagan administration's secret war in Nicaragua, the illegal arms pipeline, and the Contra drug connections by Leslie Coburn. In there, she mentions Barbara Honegger's work in the 1980 October surprise, the stealing of the election in 1980. And I've mentioned before on the air the Iran-Contra connection, secret teams and covert operations in the Reagan era by Jane Hunter, Jonathan Marshall, and Peter Dale Scott. All of them are wonderful researchers. Jonathan Marshall and Peter Dale, particularly Peter, Jonathan too, have done extensive work through this whole era, and just not the Reagan administration. That's where they caught on to the crimes of Reagan following what preceded him and how he fit into them. That's South End Press, and Jane Hunter did her own book, Israeli Foreign Policy, South Africa and Central America, and I have that. I have most of these, or a lot of them. I don't have the cartoons. And the last one I got recently was Vesco. It's called Vesco, From Wall Street to Castro's Cuba, The Rise and Fall and Exile of the King of White-Collar Crime, Big Money, High Living, Financial Trickery. There's only one page, on page 135, that he mentions Willard Zucker. That's the banker that represented Robert Vesco, and that's the banker that set up Lake Resources, that did the investments for the National Security Council and for Stanford Technology Training Group, with their offshore banks that are being protected. And then there is a book, not a new book, but it's new to me, and it's hard to get, but try to find. It's called Mind Wars, The True Story of Secret Government Research into the Military Potential of Psychic Weapons. And that book also mentions the research that Barbara Honegger was doing in the White House when she was working in the White House. Two of these books mention her name, and this book has to do with the 1st Earth Battalion. And I believe this may be the link between Oliver North, the Delta Force, and Michael Aquino, and mind control coming out of Vietnam. The Church of Satan, Hitler's Waffen SS could very easily connect, and this may be one of the big connecting links of those elements. And then the Iran-Contra report that I gave out last week with the address of the government printing office. So if you send a self-addressed stamped envelope to me, I'll give you the titles, the publishers, and you can get these books for yourself or look forward to them. And I'll bet you everyone during this following year is going to have one birthday. So you can put that on your wish list if you are wise, because this is a wonderful collection to have. And we're going to feel the pains of the Reagan administration for years, so we may as well get some of these books and understand it. Now, several weeks ago, November the 9th, on broadcast 831, I gave the sources of a lot of articles where I had the summary of Michael Aquino in the San Francisco Church of Satan. And at the bottom of the list, there was an article, Satanist accused of molesting a girl, soldier calls the probe a witch hunt. That's really a play on words, going for a witch hunt, talking about the Church of Satan. And in the article, Linda Blood is one of the people quoted in the article, just all coincidental, that name, or so forth and so forth. But I want to go into that article and some more about the Church of Satan tonight, this particular article and the details of what it means. It was written by Linda Goldstein for the San Jose Mercury, and this is the way she wrote it. I only extracted it for you, but I want it to sink in because it's going to be the groundwork for weeks of broadcast when the new year begins after this next week's broadcast. She says he is a devil worshiper with a doctorate degree. He's an Eagle Scout turned Antichrist. And I emphasize the Eagle Scout because of other articles I'm going into of sexual abuse of other areas of Eagle Scouts. In the Yellow Pages, he's listed churches, Satan, Lieutenant Michael Aquino, a military officer with access to top secrets, and a suspect in the bizarre case of child sexual abuse at Presidio in San Francisco. The controversy at the Presidio took place when as many as 60 children who attended the daycare center were allegedly molested. It took on vast proportions when the Army launched an all-out review. The Army has 300 daycare centers, and they have over 900,000 children every day. And on Sundays, they were molested while the parents were at church. This year alone, there have been 9 similar child abuse cases on military bases that they're reporting, and previous incidences reported at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in New York, at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and at the Army Daycare Center in Germany. For Aquino, the controversy is personal and bitter. It's the only public black mark against him in 2-decade military record with the Pentagon. It's extraordinary. Now, the woman in charge of police activities in San Francisco regarding the cult, and I'll go to her quote later, said that in 1983 they had evidence that Aquino should have been taken out of the Army, but the Army insisted on keeping him. So the black mark now is only one that comes because this little child recognized him in his home, identified the home and the interior. But he's gotten away with other complaints, and he also is being held, according to a news account last week, on possible child stealing. And that gets into those missing children again. The article says no charges so far have been administered against them. He performed satanic rituals at a Nazi castle, which I mentioned before, and I'm going back to that in one moment. His dark eyebrows arch upward. A short cropped black hair comes to a prominent widow's peak. Aquino came to Satanism, he said, by accident. He had just finished his undergraduate work at the University of California in Santa Barbara when he happened to attend the premiere of Rosemary's Baby and was intrigued by the entourage of Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan and an advisor to the film. Now, he not only advised Roman Polanski on this film, but he worked with the Manson family up in the Haight-Ashbury. So there was a double whammo for Polanski after making this film. And it was also filmed in the Dakota building where John Lennon was shot. He lived in that building, and scenes were filmed there, and he was killed in front of that building. All that, I suppose you might think, is coincidental, but I don't know what is coincidental any longer. Now, here is the most important part of this particular article. Aquino left for Vietnam a few months later after being associated with Anton LaVey, the Church of Satan. He left for Vietnam a few months later, serving as a psychological warfare expert, and there he joined the Church of Satan, and he became a high priest. Now, the question is, how many churches of Satan are there in the Defense Department? You may not believe in God, but how many are Antichrist? How many Antichrist worshipers of the devil are doing mind control, psychological warfare, working with the Delta forces, the Marines, the special branches of the Army? And what was Maurice Aquino's psychological experience? Did it relate to Oliver North? Oliver North was running around naked with a gun. There were descriptions of his going totally berserk, that he took R&R, rest and recreation, at a mental hospital. There were documents in the NSC papers that they found where Admiral Poindexter of the Navy was suggesting to the National Security Advisor, Robert McFarland, that we send him to Bethesda Hospital, a Navy hospital, for a while. He didn't have a fever. He didn't have a gallbladder. He didn't have a physical symptom. But Bethesda is where James Forrestal, the Secretary of the Navy, allegedly was suicidal or pushed out a window for very important reasons at the end of World War II. And what part of Bethesda was Poindexter going to send a man working for the NSC? Why did they keep him on the staff? And what happens at that Bethesda? Because if you watched Ollie North's testimony, and I luckily videotaped the whole thing, the man had a stare and glassy eyes. He had to have assistance for recall. The minute a question was half asked, he whispered to Brendan Sullivan, his attorney. Then he looked down at a piece of paper where answers could be written or clues with numbers, and then he started talking. And once one of the members of the Congress asked him what he was reading, and he said, that's private between me and my attorney, but the answers were coming there. And so the question is, with his past history of being in a mental place, being in the Delta Force, in the Special Forces, with Michael Aquino being over there specializing in this kind of activity, because there are other links of Richard Secord to the Odessa, to G. Gordon Liddy and Robert Mardian, through their attorney, Mr. Green, watching SS pictures down in the archives of the Washington buildings where they would study the SS. And Michael Aquino was on television this past week, and the police in San Francisco had taken some of his videotapes. He claimed they were mostly Carl Sagan space, but in there you see, and I photographed the Waffen SS among his belongings. The place was filled with swastikas and Nazis, and the news accounts told about the Nazi uniforms. But he went into psychological warfare as expert and joined the Church of Satan. And the question for the armed forces, for the House Armed Services Committee, is how many people joined the Church of Satan? David Berkowitz of Son of Sam case, that links to the Manson family, went to Vietnam. He served his time. He was a Jew. He was adopted by a Jewish family. He was converted there into becoming a Christian, but he went into Satanism, and the Son of Sam killings were a part of Satanic ritual in New York City, these so-called random killings, killing women sitting in cars or on dates and so forth. And how many people coming home from Vietnam are doing these killings that don't appear to be related to a larger plan? I brought in this evening, and maybe I won't have time till next week, on how many people around the country, just pulling out of my articles the past week, where the arms and legs are sawed off, they're being beheaded, they're being tortured with paper between their toes and the paper set on fire, and the tortures that are going on that I put under, I'm separating the files and putting them under occult now, but I don't even remember what classification they were thrown in with, just people who had died, and now I'm separating them, and we'll share some of those with you. Now, this article says in 1975, LaVey broke off he separated from Aquino, or Aquino left him, and he started his own church, a private organization that has internal revenue status. The internal revenue gives him his tax deduction. The article says he has an IQ of 155, and many people from Mensa, those are the group with a high IQ, in search of knowledge wherever the truth may be, are part of his organization, the Church of Satan. Members of the House Armed Services Committee and officials who oversee America's intelligence operations will not discuss Aquino's case. The police have refused to eliminate his name as a suspect. The Army stands by him and his access to top security secrets. Aquino works as a program analyst at the Army Reserve Personnel Center in St. Louis, handling all personal letters for the personal matters for the reserves. Now, some of this we had on the air 2 weeks ago, but here's a point that is I want to bring home. If I didn't do it then, I might even want to do it every week. In 1981, he was a reserve attaché to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and a year later a student at the Foreign Service Institute, sponsored by the State Department. 1981, Daniel Graham, the head of Star Wars High Frontier, was the head in this time period, I have to look up the exact dates, of the Defense Intelligence Agency. There was a group that I described, Peregrine, that was important to John Singlaub and Robert Owen, and to the death squads. Remember the broadcast I did where their matters were too important to leave to the service, that they hired people who had already killed, who showed their bona fides that did the killing. Peregrine's head, Mr. Meadows, and the two chiefs came out of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they went on to hire the Keeny Meanies over in London to help with the death squads down in Central America and to fight along with the Contras. The Defense Intelligence Agency was run, and I'm sure once he retired from there, it wasn't very hard to go back with the old people. You were the chief of it. Daniel Graham shares offices with Fritz Kramer in Washington, D.C. I've had their address on the air. I've asked many, many times for the past years, who is Gustav Anton Fritz Kramer? And the question has been asked over and over again, even to members of the General Accounting Office coming to California. Is he the Waffen SS Fritz Kramer that was Hitler's plans officer? Because he was Hitler's favorite after the war, and Senator Joe McCarthy released that Waffen SS Fritz Kramer, Hitler's favorite. There was no history after the war, but as soon as he was out of Dachau prison, the other Fritz Kramer became head of the Pentagon. He was over Westmoreland in the entire Vietnam War, and he's the Waffen SS. Then he set up the Church of Satan in Vietnam. This Aquino says it was set up in the psychological warfare. He joined the Church of Satan in Vietnam. He was a high priest in Vietnam, And with his services at the home and the offices, the church of Heinrich Himmler, it is actually mandatory that we fingerprint or somebody take this Fritz Kramer before he dies and match it to the fingerprints. I have those copy of fingerprints, whatever they're worth, as a prisoner at Dachau prison, because those would be connections of Vietnam to the Church of Satan and Heinrich Himmler. And this article tells how Aquino worked in the Defense Intelligence Agency, which Peregrine was set up in 1981, and he was over in that exact office, and these were the killing teams that were set up to go around the world and were linked to Sing Lau and Robert Owen and to the October 80 surprise with General Secord over in Iran at the time that the rescue mission was bundled, and they didn't rescue the hostages to assure Reagan's becoming the president. This article says throughout his Army career, Aquino made no secret of his involvement with Satanism, a forthrightness the Army lauded him for. He's better for a security risk because he can't be blackmailed. He doesn't have anything to hide. He's a priest in the church. And the military major Rickson said that he makes no bones about his Satanism. There's no pressure put on him and no comment about his access to top security clearances. Last year, he was at the National Defense University, and Aquino says that's as high as you can get. And in 1982, and I shared this with you before, it's very pertinent to this story. Again, he performed satanic rituals in Westphalian Castle, used as an occult sanctuary by Heinrich Himmler's SS elite in Nazi Germany. The Temple of Set has a newsletter where he told of performing the satanic rituals in the castle, Hall of the Dead, while on a tour of NATO military installations in Europe. And this week or next week, I'm going to give an example of how the Justice Department is protecting satanic killers in down in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and has a man in jail for 3 life terms, and a woman who participated in the satanic murders not only can't be heard, but the highest of the FBI chiefs in Dallas, and he was in Los Angeles and Memphis, retired and helped investigate that case of the killings in Fort Bragg, and his life is in danger. And this FBI agent has been hiding ever since because the Justice Department is protecting the satanic killers and the operations of Satan, and not going after the killers, letting somebody else serve time and letting them get the taste and the smell of blood. That involves an FBI agent by the name of Ted Gurndeson, who was helping this Mr. McDonald, Dr. McDonald. You might remember the case where he told about these occult people coming in and chopping his pregnant wife up, pregnant again, like Sharon Tate, his 2 daughters. Jeffrey McDonald has 3 life sentences. And I'll do more details on that case, but the FBI man's life hasn't been safe since the Justice Department found out that he knew somebody who had attended the ritual murder of his wife and children. So you have 2 agencies, the Justice and the military, protecting and carrying this on, and it may go right up to the plans officer, the mentor of Kissinger and Haig, Fritz Kramer, who set up the operations in Vietnam. I'll take a 1-minute break now. John Judge, the researcher who lives in Washington, D.C., is out on the West Coast again. He does work with several organizations in San Francisco and Berkeley. He's going to be speaking. The address is 6401 Freedom Boulevard. This coming Sunday night, December the 6th, this next Sunday night, December the 6th, at the Unitarian Church. It's going to be 11 to 12:15 in the morning. He'll be speaking to the church group, and you can have a chance to meet him. Paul Blue is his host. Exit off Highway 1 on Freedom Boulevard and go 1 mile to McDonald and Freedom. And you'll get a chance to meet John and share some time with him. He works on Sunday, and it's hard to get down. If it's possible to work a Monday, if he can get off, maybe I'll have him as a guest. But his job is Sunday through Thursday, so I haven't been able to work something out for him to come on World Watchers. But he is an expert on the Kennedy assassination, on the overview of what's happened in this world, of Jonestown, of the Iran-Contra affair, and also the planned genocide for blacks that has gone on through the years. He's taken my tapes all these years, and like David Emery, they take the basic work and then continue and fill in pieces, and they have time to add more hours that they can do to it, and we share information. So I think a lot of you have enjoyed John Judge, so try and make it to the Unitarian Church, 11 to 12:15 a.m., Sunday, December the 6th. Now, this is Mae Brussell, and it is the second half of broadcast number 834. The story about Aquino, I think you get the point of the importance with NATO, the rituals, the Hall of the Dead. Now, I have several books, quite a few books on the Waffen-SS, many of them, so I don't take all of this lightly. I've studied it for a long time. There's a chapter in a book called God and Beasts, the Nazis and the Occult. And I thought I would share with you a few sentences out of this book. It's written by Dusty Sklar. It came out in 1977, because when I go further into some of the things we're hearing that sound outrageous or read, it's better to have background of the thinking of these people, wondering how do you sacrifice humans. On the Geraldo Rivera show, this lady tells about watching child sacrifices and cutting their heart out when they're alive, and cutting those little children up and eating them and burning people alive. Geraldo Rivera, who has a family now, he just took a deep breath and took a break after the 20 minutes and apologized and said he wasn't sorry to have it on, but he apologized if there were children of an informative age home listening to that, and suggested that the parents divert them away from the television because they were talking about the raw facts of what's going on in America. Now, in this book, God and the Beast, just a few sentences about Heinrich Himmler and how the Waffen-SS operated. Dusty explains that Himmler studied the occult. He was interested in it. He had a huge library on the occult, everything he could get, and spiritualism. And he studied a man, Karl Deprell's book, Der Spiritismus. Now, I'm not going to pronounce these words right. Der Spiritismus, called Spiritualism. And he believed, according to this account, that there was something important about the transmigration of souls, and it gave him a new meaning, studying life and death. And this author says his interest in and sympathy with the occult endured throughout his entire life, and without it, the Reichsfuhrer of the Waffen-SS would have been quite a different person if he didn't believe in it. His occultism, along with Hitler's belief in it, was bound up in eroticism and sex. And, of course, there is sexual abuse in all of these Satan rituals. To Hitler and Lance, a gentleman named Lance, and Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler, sexuality was decadent. And the loose morality of Western Europe after the war seemed to them to travel like a plague spread by the decadent people, namely the Jews. Think of the movie The Cabaret, and a lot of nightclubs were run by Jews in Germany. They believed the Jews were bestial in their passions, corrupting pure German womanhood, making women join the radical cause of feminism. They saw the Jews as cunning, practical pimps and pornographers, able to profit materially from prostitution and interest in filth, and these were popular themes for Himmler. Right after World War I, Himmler was in contact with a number of persons who were part of the Freikorps. Those were the young groups that went out ruthlessly killing professors, teachers, people at random. In 1923, he joined the Freikorps, and as a matter of fact, there have been articles that compared Oliver North's activities to the German Freikorps. And this author said he must have enjoyed participating in the grand design to lead Germany to their greatness. He believed the Nazis would lead Germany because they were superior, and these people were frustrated with ambitions as soldiers, having lost World War I. In 1925, the SS, the Schutzstaffel, the Waffen-SS, was formed as the bodyguard for Adolf Hitler in every district. Himmler was put in charge of the local units. By 1927, when the SS was nationalized, Himmler, because of his demonstrated abilities, was made deputy leader in 1929, the Reichsfuhrer SS. Then the organization became a central bureaucracy to dispense terrorism, an elite political police giving Himmler power, second to Adolf Hitler. What fitted Himmler for the job was his skill as pigeonholing people, assigning categories, and putting them into these spots. He was able to compel his black guards to go against their own standards of morality and justify horrifying murder tactics as a utopian idealism, the killing. He said proudly of his black uniformed SS, "I know there are many people in Germany who feel sick when they see this black tunic. We can understand this, and we do not expect to be beloved by many people." Sometimes he saw the black guards as an elite cadre of the Teutonic warriors, as medieval knights protecting their lord, Adolf Hitler. His interest in the Germanic past and the Middle Ages went back to his youth. He believed in transmigration of souls, and he believed in the reincarnation, that he was the reincarnation of the 10th century German Heinrich I the Fowler, with whom he communicated in his sleep. In 1937, he had the monarch's bones dug up and put in the crypt of Quedlinburg Cathedral after a holy procession in 1937. In this time period, Heinrich Himmler was in charge of the international police, and J. Edgar Hoover in the United States was vice president of Interpol at this end of the United States, corresponding and working with names with Heinrich Himmler. But that's an aside. That comes from the book Interpol. I'm reading from Gods, Beasts, and the Nazis. He chose the town of Quedlinburg in the Harz Mountains because it was founded by the king. He was the reincarnation. Himmler invited Germans to make a pilgrimage to the tomb to honor Heinrich the Fowler. Yearly, on July the 2nd, the date of the king's death, Himmler held a midnight ritual in a clammy crypt. One of the great charms which the medieval monarch had for Himmler was his anti-Slav crusade. And he thought that was wonderful. On the 1000th anniversary of Heinrich's death, Himmler stood before Wehrmacht officers and braided and medaled SS dignitaries and continued the crusade for Germany's expansion to the east that Heinrich had left off. Himmler was obsessed, along with Hitler, with secret medieval society called the Order of the Teutonic Knights, and there a candidate had to prove noble German ancestry for 8 generations on both sides of the family tree. And in the Waffen-SS, it goes back 6 generations, and I have at my home a copy of the Waffen-SS papers of Otto von Bolschwing, whose secretary was Reagan's appointment secretary, Helene von Dahm, and then our ambassador to Vienna. She made the appointments of the Stanford Technology Trading Group, the Hakim Secords at National Security Council. She made these appointments for Reagan. She worked with Otto von Bolschwing, who was a member of the Waffen-SS going back those 600 years. I have that family chart at my home. The article says Himmler, in creating a secret order suitable for mass society, dispensed with any idea of social or economic aristocracy. The whole Aryan race was aristocratic. He admired the rigid organization of the Teutonic Knights, the strictness of their rules. Above all, he admired their secrecy. He kept writing down things on people's secrecy is what he admired most. He was a fanatical as a spy for the party. He knew what a powerful motivation it is to belong to a secret order with different rules and a hierarchical structure that could be, its mere existence could hold members in a common bond, subject to the same vows of silence or certain questions. And I wonder about Aquino becoming Church of Satan with psychological control in Vietnam, if this secret society which came home, came home a high priest in the Church of Set, if the Waffen-SS wasn't setting it up over there to bring them home, and they liked this secret order. In trying to create a new order of Teutonic Knights out of the SS, Himmler was mindful of the power of the Jesuits. According to his assistant, Walter Schellenberg, he deliberately built the SS on the principles of the Society of Jesus, using their statutes and spiritual exercises. Himmler was called the Black Jesuit by his enemies, and he was compared with the order's founder, Ignatius Loyola, by Hitler, who was pleased to have his fanatical devotion. And incidentally, the 2 parts of the church, a lot of people don't know this, of the Catholic Church, the twins of the church. One is the Pope, who is called the White Pope, and the Jesuits, who do the converting and set up the missionaries and so forth, that is the black. The head of that is the black, and Himmler was called the Black Jesuit. After the order's founder, Ignatius Loyola, Schellenberg testified at the Nuremberg trials that Himmler had the best and richest library of the Jesuit order. His literature was pursued at night for years. He built his SS organization according to Jesuit principles. And of course, you remember, or maybe you don't, the Inquisition and the torture racks and the wiping out of civilizations such as the Mayans and the Incas and the American Indians, the westward movement, wiping out these organizations and the mission's treatment of genocide towards the Indians in this country up and down this coast. He built his organization according to that. Its basis was the Constitution for the exercises of Ignatius de Loyola, and this is not, reading from this book, Gods, Beasts, and Nazis and the Occult, this is not anti-Catholic. There are Catholic Jesuits now, such as the Christic Institute. Bill Davis is a Jesuit priest, and the Sanctuary Movement is set up by Jesuits. There is a whole branch now that are being very liberal, but we're talking about those that are pursuing it from a far, far right mentality and get the go-ahead from the Vatican for these activities, such as the 3A, the death squads in South and Central America, and even now in the Philippines. This book says the supreme law was absolute in that church, and Himmler had been brought up as a Catholic, blind obedience, and he himself, an SS general, was the order's general commander. In Westphalia, near Paderborn, he kept a medieval castle, the Wewelsburg, which served, so to say, as the SS monastery. The roots of this attitude go back to his father's education and his severe Catholic conduct of life. And it's in this church on NATO maneuvers, a man with the top highest security clearance working for and taking members of the Joint Chief of Staff to the cult rituals of death. Westphalia is where Mr. Michael Aquino, we know he was there once. Probably he could go there every year. We wouldn't know, but he has written about his experiences with the Joint Chiefs and NATO exercises at the castle in Westphalia. And then this description from Dusty Sklar says, the essential principle which Heinrich Himmler borrowed was the oath of absolute blind obedience. He outdid the Jesuits in order to eliminate all possible competition to his esoteric order that he had. The SS had a common enemy with the church, which was the Freemasons, and his resistance to their doctrine. He fought the Freemasons. Heinrich Himmler had no appreciation for them or the Counter-Reformation, and he studied and also wanted to do with all of those people who opposed his order, but his order went above the Jesuits. He became supreme over them and even broke with them. And the book says Himmler's views and deeds, and this is very important, were not the excess of madness. They were not always rational, but they were not madness. They owe more to the disassociation of a fanatical occultist than to a divided personality. He spent much of his time and that of his men in investigating all kinds of research, and it didn't diminish his talent at all for an efficient organization. He wasn't split up to be in a mental hospital. He functioned really well. If his reality was non-ordinary, like Michael Aquino, he was not crazy at all. He was rather a person who was interested in good and evil spirits, in invisible power, and he felt one day we will have to give an account of ourselves, that there's karma for our deeds, and this is very important. He felt that for his karma, that you have to teach a person to look for the whole. He saw the world as a Germanic Aryan whole. He saw the whole world as a whole. And anybody who didn't serve the Germanic whole would have bad karma. You didn't have bad karma if you killed 6 or 20 million or 80 million. You had it if you didn't serve Germany the whole. When he went before his master, he was going to say, I did what you wanted me to for Germany. And this Dusty Sklar said, a man has to sacrifice himself, according to Himmler, even though it is hard for him to do. He oughtn't to think of himself. It is pleasanter to concern yourself with flower beds rather than political dust heaps and refuse dumps. But flowers themselves won't thrive unless these things are seen to. Over and over again, Himmler referred to the work of his SS men when they were placed in concentration camps to torture or murder alive or shoot as their sacrifice. It was as though they had to suffer a greater ordeal than their victims. One of his most interesting speeches to officers sympathizes with their ordeal. to have stuck it out and at the same time to have remained a decent fellow. That is what makes us hard. To do anything we're told and then remain decent makes us hard. This is a page of glory in our history, he wrote, which has never been written and is never to be written. Every cause has its idea of sacrifice, calling on individuals to give up their well-being for the sake of something greater. Himmler's idea of sacrifice was influenced by Eastern philosophy. He learned to practice, after the sayings of Buddha and Rig Vedas and others, that detachment for your acts can be done. While it might seem silly or monstrous or foolish, the purifying of it was purifying to the wise. Karma required, with the Waffen-SS, the way he turned it around, it required only that individuals carry on their unavoidable duties, discarding any consequences. You won't lose sleep at night discarding any consequences. You take your unavoidable duty. If it's 1,000-year right, that's what you do. He said one should not give up one should not give up the activity to which one is born. If you're born to lead the SS, the duty incumbent on one through birth or caste or profession, even though this might be attended by evil. For all undertakings are enveloped by evil as fire by smoke. The disengagement from the effects of fulfilling one's duties was self-sacrifice. And this book, in this chapter on the obedient man, explains how he felt that people would not be serving their duty if they didn't serve the 1,000-year Reich, and whatever it took to kill or maim or to wipe out, you were doing it for the Aryans, for the Germans, and amorality is something relative. You don't have to deal with it. It could be linked with divine essence, and he said that the main job is that if the Aryans are the greatest, and if it's necessary to kill everyone who isn't an Aryan, we'll do it. You can do it without guilt. It's a sacrifice to learn to kill and spill the blood, but you must learn to sacrifice. Now, on some more to Michael Aquino. There's an article this past weekend in the San Francisco Chronicle, Steps to Abolish New York Vigilante Child Protectors. This was November 24th. The state of New York is getting rid of the Westchester County Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children because it turned out to be an armed secret police accountable to absolutely no one. It's a bunch of vigilantes brandishing weapons and running their own office there, actually a terrorism unit set up in New York. And one of the investigators said his office went into the Westchester organization. They received complaints that the members used dangerous, abusive techniques during warrantless arrests and detainments and regarding the welfare of minors, and that they found an arsenal of pistols more powerful than those used by most police departments. So there was a society in Westchester County for the prevention of cruelty to children, and it is armed and filled with secret police weapons the police use, and even more, and brandishing weapons, handcuffs, and so forth. Then there was a story in the New York Times, November 20th. Army will close child care center, and it refers to San Francisco in the Presidio. It mentions Gary Hambright, who is under indictment for 10 molestations. Not a word, coast to coast, on the wire services about Michael Aquino. It says allegations of sexual abuse have surfaced. There's 300 child care centers, 94,000 children daily are being taken care of by the Army, and they've had complaints of at Fort Dix and at other Army centers, quite a few, 10% of all the Army centers out of 300. So you can 10% of that and see how many children have been reported being abused. Another article, San Francisco cop pleads guilty in arms case, and the San Francisco police have protected this Aquino. A member of the police department said she tried, as I quoted before, to get him out of the Army in 1983. This policeman was just sent 15 years in prison because he was getting weapons from the munitions from Camp Pendleton, the Marine base in San Diego. He had received 10 stolen hand grenades. He then had 62 other grenades, 122 pounds of plastic explosives, 11,000 rounds of ammunition, 30 blasting caps, illegal sale of guns, a member of the San Francisco Police Department stockpiling these weapons. And that's how Frank Churchill and George Corcola got arrested in 1979, selling, I think it was $1 or $2 million round of ammunition to private people in the New York Police Department. In terms of children being molested, I don't know how many of you saw an ad in the San Francisco Chronicle. Those in the East wouldn't have seen this. The article's called Gross Toys for Shockproof Kids When Holiday Fun is Ugly. It's from the San Francisco Chronicle. Some of the toys, one is a monster built from scratch with boiling flesh that comes off to the bones. Another is a squeeze Sammy. An alien blood, it's supposed to be an alien, blood pours out from his nose. Another is a sizzle clay-like monster where the flesh peels, it fills into a vat, and there's a secret formula and the flesh starts it to froth. Another toy is an alien visitor whose organs are yanked out by the internal organs are covered with gooey glow in the dark, alien blood. And another, executions in your own living room. It's advertised. American Greetings Corporation, Amtoy, makes a plastic monster. Its head blows open. Its brains are exposed. There's dangling eyeballs and mossy teeth. And G.I. Joe, a new one, sells for $200 that advertises, we can kill anything known in the universe. Those are the toys for Christmas. Keep in mind the children in the daycare centers and what they're growing up to be. Now, KTVU in San Francisco had a 10-minute interview with Michael Aquino this past week. As I mentioned, they had pictures of his Waffen-SS video, among other things, in his room. And this was the movie that had Sandra Gallant from the San Francisco Police Department discussing his love affair with the Nazis, Nazi uniforms, Nazi flags, memorabilia in the house, and said that his mother was engaged to a Waffen-SS in the 1930s. She allegedly married another man. We'll have to assume she did. And she's a millionaire and lives in San Francisco. This weekend, I saw a videotape, which I bought, called Of Pure Blood. And there's a book out by the same title, Of Pure Blood, by Clarissa Mark Hillel and Clarissa Henry McGraw-Hill, 1976. And the videotape was on television a few years ago, and I was able to buy it last week, and it tells, and I'll do more details on it again, on creating a baby for the Fuhrer from every single family in Germany. And he went to the campus, to the educated, which reminds me of the dating service that Douglas Ginsburg was running, and I believe it was a government-related service. And they made these children, and this Liebersborn program is the most secretive of anything that ever happened in Nazi Germany. And Heinrich Himmler got the idea in 1935, but it was well into operation by 1943 to 45, where they would have 1 million persons in the service of Adolf Hitler by 1980. So a good guess is that people in the 40-year-old age range, or 45 today, they didn't all come and be born at one time. There were many houses. They kidnapped children from their parents, these missing children. They never returned to their parents. They looked for the brightest children in the occupied countries because they didn't want the brightest ones opposing them. So they took the brightest into the Hitler Youth and raised them, and killed the parents, the mothers and fathers, and just stole them. They were of pure blood Aryan children that they wanted in their army, so they picked them up and stole them. I'll do more on that movie, but I want to share with you what was on Geraldo Rivera's program. Oh, also in the news program on the 10-minute segment, they said, is the Aquino case over? He hasn't been charged with the Presidio. And they said, no, there are still questions of child stealing, this NATO man, child abuse, child neglect, child molestation, and they're still going into that. Well, I have about 2 minutes just to mention. I'll probably have to begin with it next week. Geraldo Rivera had a program on the Satanic cults and a woman who had been in one for 27 years. They described the last meeting that took place was in 1981 in Mexico, and notes were available telling their plans for recruiting in the future, which began in 1982, that they would go to preschool children and get their army of the future, and they practiced black witchcraft. They're criminals with criminal intent to infiltrate the schools, the nursery schools, the grammar schools, the high schools. And the woman who was testifying about her experiences, Geraldo Rivera, said, did you ever abuse children? And she said, yes, she saw her first sacrifice when a live baby was cut open and they took out the heart. And she said they totally control you and they mean it. And once you see it, you know it. And this program was about West Point. Another person from West Point was a guest on this program. And he talked about the child abuse center and how he was asked to leave, that they preferred to cover it up, and how the children, his little daughter was dressed as a bride and married to the devil. And then they would see dogs killed and people tortured and burnt. And they also were told there was psychic surgery where they gave them a shot and evidently put them to sleep and told them they put a monkey in their stomach. And every time they were going to tell about this, they would get a pain in their stomach, so they couldn't tell. And they actually saw people burning. This was a visit to the West Point chapel while the parents were at the Christian church. The child was left at the school, at the play school, which was run by two women of the Church of Satan. And the story of the pain that these children go through was told at great length on this broadcast. It was an hour broadcast, and I don't know how many of you saw it, but it was very vivid, and Geraldo Rivera was somewhat upset. He had this witness behind one of those screens and another woman who had been part of this, and how they have to keep running and hiding, because once they reveal it, they're killed, and they've been threatened to be killed. And they talked about cannibalism, eating people, adult killing, police abuse, people as policemen abusing the children. So that is another part of this broadcast. As I say, next week I will do some more and then leave it off for 3 weeks. Not that we can't go on, but in lieu of Christmas and a new year, we'll get back to it later. In conclusion, we want to thank Coast Components at 684-1185, the Monterey Bay Area's distributor of electronic components. Thank you for the underwriting grant that brought you the past hour of World Watchers. The previous hour of World Watchers was made possible in part by Lowdown, a leading manufacturer of microcomputer peripherals located in Scotts Valley. For more information, call 438-7400. I'll be back with you in a few minutes to continue with the talk show part of the program.